Mistress comes to steal the millionaire, but pregnant wife's one word sends her running. The opulence of wealth can hide many things, secrets, betrayals, and heartbreak that no amount of money can mend. Behind the sparkling chandeliers, elegantly laid out estates, and shimmering designer dresses lies a world in which cunning and deceit flourish just as easily as roses in a well-tended garden. This story delves into the hidden life of a millionaire couple whose gilded existence is torn apart by the arrival of a sly mistress on a mission. She's determined to steal the man, seize his fortune, and rewrite her own destiny. But she never anticipated the pregnant wife's unwavering strength or a single word that would send her running. Marcia Dupont sat beneath a glimmering chandelier in the grand foyer of an estate known throughout the city simply as Ravenwood Manor. The mansion was perched on a hill overlooking pristine lawns and a private lake. Its marble floors seemed to whisper with the footsteps of countless visitors, from wealthy industrialists to foreign dignitaries. Ravenwood's grandeur was rivaled only by the quiet rumors that circulated behind closed doors. The owners, Roland and Serena Blackwood, were not only among the richest couples in the country, but also deeply in love, or so the world was led to believe. For years, their marriage had symbolized unity, respect, and a sense of genuine partnership. Anyone who witnessed Roland escorting his pregnant wife, Serena, to philanthropic events believed that they were the picture of conjugal perfection. Serena's charm was legendary. In her mid-20s, with a radiant smile that could light up a ballroom, she had been the darling of countless gossip columns, always talked about for her good deeds and down-to-earth personality. Roland, a businessman with an empire spanning real estate, technology, and fashion, was usually described as calm and meticulous, with a strategic mind that had turned him into a self-made multimillionaire before he turned 35. But behind the polished doors of Ravenwood Manor, storms were brewing. The carefully curated illusions of harmony were beginning to crack. Marcia Dupont, perched uncomfortably on an antique chair in that magnificent foyer, was a harbinger of that storm. She was an unfamiliar face at Ravenwood. No one quite knew how she had managed to secure an appointment, nor did they fully grasp her intentions. Yet she was welcomed with the courtesy extended to any visitor of status, if only because of the rumored connection she had to Roland. Marcia ran her fingers over a small diamond pendant around her neck, an inheritance from a grandmother she'd once adored. It was the only genuine piece of luxury she owned. Everything else had been purchased on credit, or borrowed from acquaintances with better fortunes. She exuded an air of confidence that derived not from wealth, but from raw determination. She had one goal in her mind: to manipulate Roland Blackwood into falling for her charms and eventually supplant his pregnant wife. She wasn't a random passers-by or a star-struck fan. She had studied Roland meticulously. She knew his daily schedule, his likes, and even the brand of cologne he favored. She was aware that he occasionally visited a private lounge in downtown Chicago called La Belle Vive, known for the hush-hush deals that happened there amid swirling cigar smoke and chilled champagne. She knew about his philanthropic appearances at charity galas for Save the Children or the lavish annual fundraiser at the Ritz-Carlton, where Chicago's elite, including old money families and local celebrities, converged. More important than these public engagements, however, was the information gleaned from well-placed bribes and cleverly extracted secrets. Roland's marriage, though outwardly perfect, had hit a rocky patch. No one else in that foyer, with its vaulted ceilings and stylized frescoes, suspected Marcia's true motive. She was there under the guise of a new interior designer, recommended by an acquaintance of Roland's. She had the portfolio to show for it, though most pictures in it had been stolen from obscure websites. Yet her real mission was straightforward: infiltrate the household and tear Roland away from Serena. She had surmised, through keen observation of her prior paramours, and she'd had many, including men twice her age, that men of Roland's caliber often succumb to the novelty of a new flame, particularly during a time of vulnerability or marital tension. As she awaited the man of the house, she ignored the antiques around her, the gilded chairs, the carved mahogany tables, and the million-dollar paintings. Her eyes were fixed on the future, her future as a millionaire's partner, an existence of champagne brunches, weekend getaways by private jet, and a flamboyant sense of security. She had no qualms about sabotaging another woman's life to get there. Serena's pregnancy was merely an inconvenience, if anything. Marcia had grown up in modest circumstances. After her mother's death, she'd bounced between foster homes, learning to fend for herself at a young age. The injustice of that life shaped her into a cunning survivor. Wealth was her passport out of fear, out of instability, and she would do whatever it took to acquire it. She had become adept at lying, at performing any role necessary in the game of seduction. Now, with the biggest target of her career, she was determined to outdo herself. The double doors finally swung open, and Roland Blackwood emerged from his study. He was tall, with an athletic build, his hair immaculately groomed, and his presence emanating an understated confidence. Despite his aura of composure, there was a curious flicker in his eyes when he saw Marcia. He wasn't entirely sure what had brought her here, but he was a man who never turned away a conversation that might yield new business or creative synergy. Little did he know, he was about to feed the serpent that would threaten to strangle his marriage. "Thank you for coming," Roland said politely, extending his hand. "I've been told you have some interesting ideas for refurbishing Ravenwood." Marcia's lips curled into a practiced, demure smile. "It's an honor, Mr. Blackwood. I've admired Ravenwood from afar, and I have some concepts that might capture its history while adding a fresh elegance." At that moment, neither of them could imagine the labyrinth of lies, manipulation, and heartbreak that would follow. Nor could they sense the untapped strength within Roland's pregnant wife, Serena, who would refuse to let her life be shattered without a fight. And in the darkest hour, when secrets came to light, one word from Serena would be all it took to unveil Marcia's deceptions and leave her scrambling for the exit, battered by the unrelenting force of karma. Serena Blackwood sat in the estate's sunroom, gazing out onto the manicured gardens and the gentle ripples on the lake. She was halfway through her pregnancy, her figure now visibly round and glowing. Her schedule had been quiet for the last month, as she had reduced her public appearances to focus on her health and the health of her unborn child. Yet, the rest had also sharpened her instincts. She sensed something amiss, an undercurrent of unease that settled in her bones. Pregnancy often heightens a woman's awareness. Small details stand out that might otherwise go unnoticed. Perhaps it was the hushed conversations she caught between the servants. Perhaps it was Roland's slightly distracted manner lately. When she asked him about his day, he would respond with facts and figures, but the warmth in his voice was muted. She had faith in their love, yet she knew that trust alone wouldn't soothe her unease. Instinct told her that something was off. That afternoon, Serena decided to observe the estate staff. If rumors were circulating, the staff would be the first to catch wind. She walked through the hallways, letting her presence be casually known. Outside the library, she encountered Helene, the young housekeeper, who looked up with a blend of admiration and concern. "Madam, is there anything you need?" Helene asked. Serena offered a smile. "Just taking a little walk." "How are you holding up with all the changes around the house? I hear Mr. Blackwood is considering some renovations." Helene's face wavered with something akin to discomfort. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood was meeting an interior designer today. She left not too long ago." Serena asked casually. Is she new to the field? Helene nodded. I believe so. I overheard a conversation about some new, fresh perspective. She certainly seemed confident. There was a moment's pause, and Serena gently coaxed, confident in what sense? Helene lowered her eyes, hesitant. I'm not sure if it's my place to comment, madam, but her manner was a bit forward. She didn't act shy about meeting Mr. Blackwood. Serena's heart fluttered, though she kept a calm exterior. Thank you, Helene. I appreciate your honesty. Such small remarks fed Serena's sense of unease. She shrugged it off publicly, but in private, her suspicions grew. Who was this new designer? And why would her behavior raise eyebrows in the staff? That evening, Roland arrived late for dinner. Their conversation was cordial, but Serena noticed he was withdrawn. She observed him quietly, reading the tension in his shoulders, the shadows under his eyes. He mentioned the interior designer, Marcia, in passing, praising her creativity. She showed me some sketches, Roland said, swirling his wine. I'm impressed. She has a knack for blending modern minimalism with classic Gothic revival. Serena wanted to ask for more details, but resisted the urge to pry right away. Instead, she smiled. I'm sure it'll be beautiful. When do I get to see these designs? I'll arrange a meeting soon. Let's wait until she polishes them up. As they finished their meal, Serena looked into Roland's eyes. She wanted to find her old husband there, the man who made her laugh, who wrapped his arms around her and said that money and power meant nothing without her. Instead, she glimpsed a flicker of restlessness. She reminded herself not to jump to conclusions. A new project often excited him. Nonetheless, she promised herself she would be vigilant. Marcia, thrilled with her first meeting at Ravenwood, wasted no time in planning her next moves. She cultivated a narrative that would bring her ever closer to Roland. She presented herself as well-educated, dropping references to reputable institutions like the Parsons School of Design, though she'd never set foot there. She claimed her father had been a notable architect who had once collaborated with names like Frank Gehry. Every lie, every fabricated detail was carefully curated to entice Roland and show him that they were kindred spirits of refinement and vision. Her next step was to schedule private sessions outside the estate. She pitched the idea of examining top-tier furnishings and art pieces around Chicago. She invited Roland to join her on visits to exclusive showrooms. While Roland initially protested that he had a busy schedule, Marcia had anticipated his reluctance. She sweetened the deal by hinting at a potential partnership. If he liked her interior design approach, maybe they could collaborate on a bigger scale for his chain of boutique hotels. The possibility of a profitable venture captured Roland's attention, and soon he found himself agreeing to meet her for a showroom tour. Marcia meticulously curated every aspect of these outings. She wore elegant but understated outfits that accentuated her figure without screaming for attention. She used subtle perfume, ensuring that a faint trace would linger after she left. During their talks, she artfully balanced her knowledge of design with sly compliments about Roland's business acumen. "Your expansions into boutique hotels are truly visionary," she remarked, as they strolled through a top-tier furniture store in the city's Gold Coast district. "It's not just about offering a room, it's about offering an experience. I can see the passion you pour into every project." Roland nodded, a hint of pride in his eyes. "It's always been my philosophy that luxury should evoke emotion, not just status." She pressed her hand lightly to her chest, feigning admiration. "You know, it's rare to find someone in your position who still cares about the art, not just the profit. If we decide to work together on the interior design of your hotels, I believe we could create something truly extraordinary." Their interactions became increasingly familiar. They moved from showrooms to exclusive art galleries. At each location, Marcia made sure to mention her connections that could provide them with unique pieces at better prices. She painted a grand vision, rooms lined with curated artwork, lobbies that told stories, and subtle, thematic elements that would differentiate Roland's hotels from any competitor in the marketplace. While Roland found himself increasingly charmed by her expertise and enthusiasm, he tried to keep his boundaries. He was a married man, soon to be a father. Yet, it was impossible to deny that Marcia stirred something in him, an excitement, perhaps even an infatuation, that he had not felt in a long while. Throughout his marriage, he had never seriously contemplated infidelity. But as the days went on, Marcia's magnetism seemed more potent. She was always available, always flattering, and always making him feel like the center of attention. Little did he know that Marcia's real life was far from the sophisticated front she portrayed. She rented a small apartment on the fringes of a run-down neighborhood, bills piled up on her kitchen table. The only sign of luxury in her place was her carefully curated wardrobe. She sank every spare penny into fine dresses, shoes, and handbags, all to maintain an illusion she had painstakingly constructed. She was a gambler, betting everything on her ability to secure Roland's affection and finances before her own resources ran dry. In time, she enticed Roland to a private dinner at a swanky restaurant called Merrill & Sons, a high-end steakhouse located near the Chicago River. She framed it as a discussion about design concepts. When they arrived, she had already reserved the most private booth, one tucked away from prying eyes. Over a bottle of rare French wine, their conversation glided from professional musings to personal revelations. Marcia shared anecdotes of a troubled childhood, half-truths laced with emotional hooks. She cast herself as a survivor of adversity, fueling the notion that she was a strong, independent woman who just needed a mentor, an ally, or something more. Roland found himself touched by her stories, his empathy clouding his judgment. He didn't notice how her hand occasionally brushed his across the table, nor did he fully register the longing glances she directed at him. He was enthralled. During a quiet moment, Marcia leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You know, Roland, I've never met anyone who balances drive and compassion like you do," she said, letting her gaze linger on him. "Most wealthy men I've known are cold and mechanical, but you're different." He felt a surge of pride, but it was tainted by guilt. He was married, and his wife was pregnant with his child. Even so, he didn't reject Marcia's flattery. Instead, he rationalized that this was just harmless socializing with a potential business partner. But Marcia sensed that she was close to reeling him in. Every passing day she spent with Roland built an emotional bridge between them. His confidences, frustrations, and hopes were all gently siphoned by her. Still, she knew that the real obstacle was Serena. The thought of his loyal, beautiful wife, pregnant with his child, made Marcia bristle. She knew Serena was loved by the city's elite and fiercely admired by Roland's employees. If she wanted Roland to herself, she needed to erode the foundation of his marriage from within, ensuring that even the slightest crack she widened would become impossible to repair. Serena noticed the late nights. Roland no longer came home at the usual hour, often blaming meetings or client dinners. When she asked about the details, he offered brisk answers. Part of her wanted to believe that her husband was simply preoccupied with work. However, certain inconsistencies began to accumulate. Unfamiliar perfume clung faintly to his suit jacket. Text messages arrived at odd hours, prompting him to silence his phone discreetly. Shadows of doubt grew in Serena's mind, pushing her to consider the unthinkable. Was Roland seeing another woman? She tried to reason herself out of suspicion. Roland had never before given her a reason to doubt his fidelity. In fact, one of the qualities that had drawn her to him was his unwavering devotion. Despite the facade of the perfect life, Pregnancy had introduced tension they hadn't anticipated, her occasional emotional swings, the constraints on her ability to attend events by his side, her focus shifting toward the baby. Perhaps these changes weighed on him more than she realized, but the possibility that there might be someone else haunted her. She decided it was time to put her investigative instincts to work. She reached out to a close friend, Danielle, who was well connected in the social circuit. If there were rumors swirling around about Roland and another woman, Danielle might have heard something. They met for brunch at a chic cafe known as Le Petit Amour, a place frequented by business executives and socialites. Danielle arrived, kissing Serena on both cheeks before settling in. After ordering coffee and a tray of pastries, Serena cut to the chase. "I need to know if there have been whispers about Roland," she said, trying to sound casual but failing to hide her anxiety. Danielle paused, searching Serena's face. "I have heard something, but I didn't want to believe it. It's a rumor that Roland's been seen with a younger woman. They've been spotted at a few galleries, a furniture showroom. I thought it was just business." Serena closed her eyes briefly, her heart pounding. "A new interior designer, right?" Danielle nodded. "Yes, that's the one, Marcia Dupont. She showed up out of nowhere, and she's been flaunting her connection with Roland to certain people around town. But it could still be purely professional, Serena." Serena swallowed hard, her appetite gone. "I want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but something feels wrong. And I'm scared." Danielle reached across the table, squeezing Serena's hand. "I'm here for you, no matter what. If you want, I can tap into my network to see what else I can find out. But be careful. I don't want you stressing yourself. Your health and the baby come first." Serena nodded, tears threatening to well in her eyes. "Thank you, Danielle. Please, let me know if you hear anything else." She returned to Ravenwood Manor with her emotions swirling. On one hand, she deeply cared for Roland and their unborn child. On the other, she felt she couldn't ignore the signs. She decided that, for now, she would gather information discreetly, hoping that her worst fears would not be realized. That night, after dinner, Serena proposed they spend some time together, but Roland politely declined, citing fatigue. She suggested a quiet stroll by the gardens, a nightly ritual they once cherished. He hesitated before finally agreeing. As they walked under the moonlit sky, Serena tried to gently open him up. "You've been so busy lately, Roland. I miss you," she said softly, her voice laced with vulnerability. He looked away, guilt flashing in his eyes. "I know, Serena. I've just got a lot on my plate with these new projects." She nodded. "I understand. But please don't shut me out. I want to support you." Roland forced a smile. "I appreciate that." Yet something in his tone sounded hollow. Serena decided not to press further that night. She recognized his unease and suspected that a direct confrontation would only drive him away. Yet she also sensed a fleeting glimpse of guilt and conflict in him, a sign that perhaps the situation was not too far gone. If she could speak to Roland openly, if she could remind him of the love they had built, maybe she could salvage their marriage before it crumbled. Marcia was not the type to sit back and wait for destiny to unfold. She believed in orchestrating her own fate. As Roland's attention toward her grew more evident, she began to escalate her tactics. She arranged dinners under the pretense of reviewing design plans. She invited him to exclusive events that she claimed would be beneficial for his business network. Under the soft glow of candlelit tables or amid the pulsating energy of high society galas, she inched closer and closer into his personal space. One evening, she hosted a small gathering at her rented apartment, branding it a design preview night. She lured Roland by promising that a few renowned designers and potential investors would be in attendance. In truth, she only managed to fill the cramped space with a few acquaintances posing as guests. She dressed her apartment in borrowed decor, ornate centerpieces, plush throws, and expensive-looking rugs. All illusions curated for Roland's eyes. When Roland arrived, he was struck by the sophistication she had conjured. The low light, the carefully selected music, and the enticing aroma of catered hors d'oeuvre created an atmosphere that felt both intimate and seductive. A handful of people mingled, sipping champagne, but Roland noticed the staged nature of it all. Still, he was intrigued. He recognized her resourcefulness. She had turned a modest space into something special. Midway through the evening, Marcia found a moment to draw Roland aside. She handed him a flute of champagne, tilting her head so her hair fell gracefully over her shoulder. "So, tell me," she said, her voice low, "am I living up to the expectations of this partnership?" Her proximity, the sparkle in her eyes, the subtle perfume. Roland felt a jolt of conflict. His rational mind screamed that he was treading dangerous waters. Yet his heart thudded with an addictive rush of newness. He told himself it was simply excitement about a promising collaboration, but deep down, he knew it was more. He cleared his throat, stepping back slightly. "You're quite impressive, Marcia. I have to admit that." She leaned closer again, feigning interest in a painting on her wall. "I believe we both have the potential to do amazing things, Roland." He sipped his champagne and felt his phone buzz in his pocket. He glanced at the screen. It was Serena. A pang of guilt made him tense. He wondered what his pregnant wife was doing, likely at home, resting, perhaps waiting for him to return. He thought about ignoring the call, but decided to answer in a corner, away from the crowd. "Hey, honey," he said, trying to sound casual. "Is everything all right?" Serena's voice was soft, tinged with concern. "I'm fine. Just wanted to see if you'd be home soon." "You didn't mention a meeting this late." Roland glanced over at Marcia, who watched him intently, her eyes scanning him like a predator reading prey. "I'm at a design preview event," he said, his voice cracking with forced calm. "It came up last minute. I'll be home soon." He ended the call and stared at his reflection in a window. He barely recognized himself clutching a glass of champagne in some woman's apartment, feeling the gravitational pull of infidelity. He knew a line existed, and he was quickly nearing it, if not stepping over it already. Marcia approached, an unreadable expression on her face. "Everything all right?" she asked in a tone that was deceptively gentle, yet coiled with tension. Roland nodded numbly. "Yes, just my wife checking in." She gave him a look that dripped with calculated sympathy. She must be so worried, being pregnant and all. It can't be easy. He tensed, unsure if he detected a veiled taunt. "No, it's not easy for her. That's why I should probably head back soon." Marcia didn't argue. Instead, she brushed a hand over his shoulder in a fleeting gesture of comfort. "Of course. We'll have more time to finalize details next week." He left feeling an intense swirl of emotions: arousal, guilt, curiosity, shame. Marcia was adept at leveraging just the right blend of seduction and professional courtesy, leaving him with no definitive excuse to cut ties. He rationalized that he was too invested in the design project to sever things abruptly. Moreover, a voice inside him admitted a truth. He didn't want to let her go yet. With each day, Serena grew more certain that something was amiss. Roland's mood swings were increasingly stark. Sometimes he was overly attentive, as though compensating for a hidden guilt, and other times he was distant, lost in his own world. She didn't want to believe that the man she loved, the father of her unborn child, was on the verge of betraying her. Yet the evidence was accumulating. In a quiet act of desperation, she looked through the logs of the family chauffeur who often drove Roland to business appointments. She discovered an unsettling pattern of visits to unfamiliar addresses, restaurants, and galleries places. Serena had never heard Roland mentioned before. She confronted the chauffeur discreetly. The man hesitated but ultimately confided that some of these trips were indeed to meet with Marcia Dupont. One evening, when Roland was out for what he described as a late meeting, Serena felt her nerves on edge. She hadn't been sleeping well, and the stress was beginning to wear on her. She decided to distract herself with a routine task, and began sorting through the pile of mail that had accumulated on Roland's desk. Most of it was business correspondence, invitations, and requests for charity appearances. But in the midst of it all, she stumbled upon a small envelope addressed to Roland in elegant handwriting. No sender information was visible, just a subtle flourish of an M in the corner. Her heart hammered as she opened it, half expecting a direct admission of love or lust from this shadowy woman who had invaded her marriage. Instead, she found an intricately designed invitation to an event celebrating emerging visionaries in modern design, to be held at a private art gallery downtown. Roland was listed as a special guest, personally invited by Marcia Dupont. A wave of nausea washed over Serena. She realized that Roland had not mentioned this to her, even though it was only 3 days away. She wondered if she was expected to remain blissfully unaware while he escorted Marcia around an exclusive function. She also noticed that the event conveniently clashed with a prenatal class they were supposed to attend together. Serena forced herself to breathe slowly. She reminded herself that in the absence of confirmation, this was still conjecture, but she felt an overwhelming urgency to protect her marriage, her unborn child, and her own sanity. That night, she waited for Roland to return, tears brimming at the corners of her eyes. She decided that if he didn't come clean this time, she would muster the strength to confront him directly. When he finally stepped through the grand entrance of Ravenwood around midnight, Serena was on the living room couch, the lights dimmed. He stopped in his tracks upon seeing her awake and obviously distressed. "Why are you still up?" he asked, concerned. Serena held up the envelope. "I found this on your desk." He glanced at it, recognition sparking in his eyes. "Oh, that! It's just a design event, nothing major." She bristled, struggling to maintain composure. "If it's nothing major, why hide it from me?" Roland sighed, looking away. "I wasn't hiding it, I just forgot to mention it. There's been a lot on my mind." Serena felt anger and sorrow whirling inside her. "We were supposed to attend a prenatal class that night." He ran a hand through his hair, clearly uneasy. "I know, and I was going to talk to you about rescheduling. It's a big networking event for the hotels. It's important." Serena's voice trembled. "I'm not important. Our baby's not important. We made these plans weeks ago, Roland." He stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Look, Serena, I'm under enormous pressure right now. I'm trying to expand, secure deals, keep everything afloat. This design event could open doors." She couldn't restrain her emotions any longer. "Is it about the event, or is it about her?" Roland froze. "Her? Who?" "Marcia Dupont," Serena spat out, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Don't lie to me. I know you've been seeing her outside of work, going to all sorts of places you never mention. The staff is talking. People in the city are talking. How could you do this to me now when I'm pregnant with our child?" He stiffened, guilt etched across his face. "Serena, it's not what you think. She's just a designer I'm working with, someone with great ideas. I might have let it get a bit personal, but nothing's happened." Serena clung to a shred of hope. "Then prove it. Stop seeing her outside of professional settings. Bring the meetings back to the estate. Let me meet her. Let me see for myself." Roland hesitated, his eyes flicking away, which confirmed Serena's worst fears. "It's complicated," he said. She inhaled shakily, stepping away from him. "Complicated how?" "Because you're falling for her?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The silence was damning. Serena felt her chest tighten, her vision blur with tears. Without another word, she left the living room. Roland didn't pursue her. In that vacuum, she was certain that she stood on the precipice of losing her marriage. Yet a part of her clung to the strength she had always treasured within herself. She thought of her unborn child and vowed that she would not go down without a fight. Determined not to cower, Serena decided she would attend the design event unannounced and face the situation head-on. She informed Danielle of her plan, who insisted on accompanying her. On the night of the event, Serena donned a sophisticated black gown that gracefully draped over her baby bump. Though she was well into her second trimester, her posture and composure radiated confidence. It was important for her to appear strong for herself and for her child. Danielle helped her navigate the crowd of well-dressed patrons at the private gallery. The space was filled with contemporary art pieces, each with a minimalist yet provocative flair. She spotted Roland near a makeshift stage, dressed in a tailored suit, sipping champagne. By his side, laughing at something he said, was Marcia Dupont. Her figure was wrapped in a shimmering silver dress, the plunging neckline leaving little to imagination. She had the demeanor of someone who felt wholly entitled to Roland's attention. When Roland noticed Serena, his eyes widened and he nearly dropped his glass. Marcia followed his gaze, her posture stiffening. The moment felt electric, as though every person in the room sensed a tectonic shift. Serena approached calmly, Danielle by her side. With a courteous nod at Marcia, she addressed Roland. "I thought I'd come see these emerging designs myself. After all, Ravenwood is my home, too." Her tone was controlled, but it held a razor's edge. Roland struggled to smile, obviously rattled. "I didn't expect you here." Marcia stepped forward, attempting to exude confidence. "Serena Blackwood, I presume. I've heard so much about you." Serena offered a tight smile. "Yes, and I believe you're the designer who's been working closely with my husband." "Quite closely, from what I hear." Marcia returned the smile, though her eyes were chilly. "Roland's been kind enough to involve me in his expansion projects. I'm honored to have his trust." Serena's heart pounded. He's a trusting man indeed. Danielle sensed the tension and tried to diffuse it by nodding to the gallery's art pieces. "Why don't we admire some of the featured designs while we chat? After all, this event is about modern vision." Roland exhaled, relieved that the momentary standoff might be cooling. He gestured to a series of sketches mounted on the wall. "These are some proposals for boutique hotel interiors," he said, addressing Serena. Marcia designed them. Serena examined the sketches carefully. They were indeed impressive, clean lines, elegant color palettes, furniture that combined comfort with an avant-garde aesthetic. But she also recognized the intangible elements that Marcia had used to wedge herself into Roland's life. She recalled an old adage, "The devil often comes dressed as beauty." She turned to Marcia, measuring her words. "Your work is lovely. I can see why Roland values your input." Marcia's smile widened, though the corners of her lips quivered with a certain tension. "Thank you. I put my heart into every detail." Serena was about to respond when a sleek, well-dressed woman took the stage. She welcomed the attendees and began describing the significance of the new wave of interior design. As the crowd turned its attention to the speaker, Roland gently guided Serena aside. Concern knitted across his brow. "You shouldn't be here in your condition. There's a lot of standing, and the place is crowded," he said in a low voice. Serena lifted her chin. "I am perfectly capable of standing for a while, Roland. And this is a public event, isn't it? I want to be involved in what you're doing." He sighed, guilt flickering in his gaze. "Let's not make a scene, okay?" She looked at him with sadness. Then don't give me reasons to. Before Roland could respond, Marcia swept over, joining them. She flashed a disarming smile. Serena, how about I give you a private tour of the exhibit? The pieces over there are particularly stunning, and I'd love your opinion. The proposition was cunning, a direct challenge disguised as hospitality. Serena hesitated, but Danielle squeezed her arm encouragingly. Against her better judgment, Serena nodded. All right. Lead the way. The two women walked side by side, ignoring the hush that fell over those observing them. Marcia exuded a practiced charm, pointing out design elements and influences. However, her real motive became clear when they reached a quieter section of the gallery, away from prying eyes. You know, Serena, Marcia said, her voice measured, Roland has always spoken highly of you. He respects you a great deal, and I respect what you two have built together. Serena bristled. That's kind of you. Though, respect would imply boundaries. Marcia laughed lightly, though her eyes remained cold. Are you accusing me of overstepping? I'm simply doing my job as his designer, bringing a fresh perspective to his ventures. It's up to him where he invests his time. Serena felt her pulse race. She realized Marcia was no naive admirer. She was a calculated predator. He's a married man, soon to be a father. Marcia offered a thin smile. A father, yes, but a husband who might be longing for something more. That's between the two of you. Don't blame me if he finds my company stimulating. Rage swelled in Serena's chest. She struggled to maintain composure. I won't let you harm my family. Marcia arched an eyebrow. We'll see about that. If Roland's truly devoted to you, then you have nothing to worry about, right? Serena's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She took a step back, reminding herself to breathe for the sake of her unborn child. I've dealt with all sorts of challenges in my life. Don't assume I'll let you walk away unscathed. Marcia's lips curved into a smug smile. I never assume. I observe, I adapt, and I conquer. Good luck, Serena. May the best woman win. With those words, she turned away and vanished into the throng of partygoers. Serena stood there, her heart pounding, tears threatening to spill. She had come face to face with the woman who aimed to destroy her marriage. In that moment, she pledged she would not succumb to fear or sorrow without a fight. If Marcia wanted a battle, she would get one. Marcia wasted no time intensifying her hold on Roland. She arranged private design dinners, claiming they'd help finalize his boutique hotel plans. In reality, each meeting grew more intimate under dim lights and soft music. One night, she invited him to a design preview at her apartment, a cramped space cleverly staged with borrowed decor. Roland noticed the forced elegance, but felt a strange mix of excitement and guilt as Marcia showered him with attention. Midway through, Serena called, anxious about his late-night absence. Guilt tore at him. He felt he was crossing a line but couldn't pull away. Marcia, standing close, pretended concern for his pregnant wife while reminding him of their unmatched creative synergy. Her calculated charm overwhelmed his better judgment. Torn between loyalty and desire, Roland left feeling ensnared, too wary to continue yet too intrigued to stop. The main sitting room of Ravenwood was prepared for a formal presentation of Marcia's design proposals. Serena watched from a distance as staff arranged fabric swatches and design boards on a polished table. When Marcia arrived exuding confidence in a tailored outfit, Serena forced a polite greeting, while Roland hovered nearby, tense but determined to see this through. Marcia's presentation was polished and professional, though she seemed to address Roland more than Serena. Each subtle touch on his arm and the pointed glances in his direction fueled Serena's suspicions. At the end, Serena calmly began questioning Marcia's credentials, mentioning inconsistencies in her education and previous work. Marcia grew visibly uncomfortable, but managed to explain it all away. Sensing the growing strain, Roland tried to steer the meeting back on track, but the atmosphere was already charged. Serena refused to let Marcia sidestep her questions. This was her home, after all, and she would protect it. When the meeting finally ended, Marcia packed her portfolio with a tight smile, leaving behind an undercurrent of hostility. Alone with Roland, Serena confronted him about the tension. He insisted nothing was going on, but Serena saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The lines were now drawn, and she resolved to stand her ground. If Marcia's flirtation was the first strike, Serena was more than ready to defend her marriage right there at Ravenwood, where it all began. Days turned into weeks, and Marcia continued to weave her web. She and Roland collaborated on multiple design proposals, even traveling to a neighboring city to inspect potential sites for expansion. Their interactions grew bolder, and rumors spread that they were booking joint hotel rooms during these trips. Serena could no longer deny that the situation had spiraled out of control. She realized that if Roland was unwilling to protect their marriage, she had to protect herself and her child. In secret, Serena contacted an old friend who was a private investigator. She provided him with all the suspicious details about Marcia, from her questionable educational background to her rumored debts. It took time, but eventually he compiled a damning dossier. Marcia had a history of targeting wealthy men, ingratiating herself under various pretenses, sometimes as a business consultant, sometimes as a designer, occasionally even as a life coach. She had left a trail of broken relationships, lawsuits, and bankruptcies in her wake. Yet she was always elusive enough to avoid legal culpability. The investigator also discovered she was dangerously in debt to unsavory lenders, using each new victim to bail herself out. Armed with this knowledge, Serena was determined to expose Marcia, not only to Roland, but to others who might be at risk. However, she knew that merely confronting Marcia with these facts might not suffice. A cunning manipulator like Marcia could easily spin the narrative, claim that the information was fabricated, or that Serena was a jealous wife lashing out. Then, as though the universe decided to tip the scales, karma made its entrance. During one of their visits to a prospective hotel site, Marcia convinced Roland to enjoy a celebratory dinner for a deal she claimed was about to close. She had, in reality, borrowed a massive sum of money to stage a lavish night, renting a VIP room in a high-end restaurant, hiring photographers to pretend they were paparazzi, and commissioning a forged letter of intent from a supposed investor in Europe. Her plan was to show Roland that she was a powerhouse who could attract major deals, thus solidifying her claim to be his perfect partner in business and in life. However, the lenders who had fronted her the money decided they wanted immediate repayment. That same night, as Marcia and Roland laughed over expensive champagne, two intimidating men arrived at the restaurant. Unbeknownst to Roland, these men had been trailing Marcia for weeks, waiting for the right moment to confront her in public, where she would feel pressured to pay or face humiliation. "Miss Dupont," one of the men said, sidling up to their table. "We need to talk." Marcia's face went pale. Roland, startled, looked up. "Is there a problem?" The second man eyed Roland dismissively, addressing Marcia directly. "You owe a substantial sum, Miss Dupont." Time's run out. Embarrassed and angry, Marcia tried to hush them. "This is not the place." "I'll get you the money soon." The men exchanged a cold glance. "You've said that before." Roland stood, attempting to regain control. "Gentlemen, let's handle this civilly." They stared him down. "This doesn't concern you, Mr. Blackwood. This is between us and Miss Dupont." The restaurant's well-heeled patrons began to notice the commotion. Marcia, panicked, begged Roland to pay off the men on her behalf, promising she would repay him once her investor funds came through. Realizing that he was now entangled in a scandalous scene, Roland hesitated, but he had come too far to back out gracefully. Against his better judgment, he wrote a check to settle Marcia's debt, much to the men's satisfaction. Once they left, Roland turned to Marcia, appalled. "What in the world have you gotten yourself into? Who are these people?" Marcia fumbled for an explanation, tears in her eyes. She concocted a tale of short-term cash flow issues and a big European deal that was due to finalize any day now. She painted herself as a victim of circumstance, professing gratitude for Roland's kindness. Yet, seeds of doubt finally rooted in Roland's mind. This was all too suspicious, too shady, and he realized how precarious his situation had become. Still, Marcia had a stranglehold on his emotional vulnerability. He felt partly responsible for her. He rationalized that once the big deal materialized, everything would be fine. But karma wasn't done yet. The next morning, Roland returned to Ravenwood. His eyes were heavy with exhaustion, and he looked visibly shaken. Serena took one look at him and sensed that something dramatic had occurred. She debated whether to confront him with the dossier on Marcia right away or to see if he would come clean on his own. They sat down in the breakfast nook, the aroma of fresh coffee hovering between them. Serena steeled herself. "Roland, we need to talk." He exhaled, nodding wearily. "I know." Before he could continue, Serena laid the investigator's file on the table. "This is about Marcia. You need to see what she's done in the past and what she's been doing now." Roland's jaw clenched. He opened the file hesitantly, scanning the pages. Photographs, bank statements, and testimony from past victims formed a mosaic of deceit. With each new revelation, his face twisted between shock and anger. He realized how thoroughly he had been played, how Marcia had systematically preyed on his trust and lured him into a financial and emotional labyrinth. How did you get all this?" he asked, voice trembling. Serena answered calmly. "I hired a private investigator. I needed to know who this woman was and how dangerous she might be." Roland shut the file, burying his face in his hands. Guilt and shame warred within him. He had nearly thrown away his marriage for a carefully orchestrated illusion. "Serena," he choked out, "I'm so sorry. I've been a fool." Tears glistened in Serena's eyes. "I'm not the one who needs your apology most. It's our child. But I accept it if you show me you mean it. If you're willing to cut her out of our lives immediately." He swallowed hard. Yes, of course. I'm done. I'll call off any business deals, block her number, do whatever it takes." She exhaled, relief flooding her. For the first time in weeks, she felt hope. "Thank you," she whispered, her hand drifting to her pregnant belly. She paused before adding, "It won't be easy. She may try to manipulate you again, or threaten you with blackmail, but we'll face it together." Roland reached for her hand, a wave of regret overpowering him. "I'll make it right." Meanwhile, Marcia was unaware that her fortress of lies had crumbled overnight. Still believing she retained a hold on Roland's heart and bank account, she decided to make a brazen move. She arrived at Ravenwood unannounced, breezing past the hesitant staff. She felt emboldened by the check. Roland had written to clear her debt. Surely he was completely under her spell now. She found Roland and Serena in the estate's grand foyer, standing side by side. The tension in the air was palpable. Roland's posture was stiff, but determined. Serena's gaze was fierce, protective. "Oh, Serena," Marcia said, feigning surprise. "I didn't expect to see you here, in the middle of the day." She turned to Roland, voice dripping with false warmth. "I came to tell you the investor wires are being finalized. You'll have your money back in no time, and our collaboration can proceed without interruption." Roland's expression turned cold. "No, Marcia, our collaboration is over." Marcia blinked, momentarily thrown off. "Over? but we have so many projects in motion. We had plans. Serena took a step forward. Her belly was clearly visible, a potent reminder of the stakes at hand. We know who you are. We know what you've done. Marcia's eyes darted between them, searching for a lifeline. I don't understand. Roland lifted the investigator's file. Don't lie. We've got everything. Your scams, your false credentials, your manipulations. Marcia's composure wavered. She realized that the game was up. In desperation, she tried one last trick, painting herself as the wronged party. Roland, you can't believe all those lies. I would never hurt you. I love you. I can give you so much more than she ever could. Don't you see how she's poisoning your mind against me? Roland stood firm. No, Marcia, I'm done. Marcia's face twisted, desperation giving way to rage. You don't know what you're throwing away, Roland. I'll ruin you. I'll go to the press, claim you seduced me, exploited me. Suddenly, Serena stepped in front of Roland, her posture regal, her eyes burning with maternal protectiveness. She stared Marcia down. Marcia reflexively took a step back, a flicker of fear crossing her face at the intensity of Serena's glare. And then Serena uttered a single powerful word, one that encompassed the full force of her love, her fury, and her determination to protect her family. Out. It was not a shout, not a request, but a command. One syllable that carried the weight of a woman who would no longer be victimized, a soon-to-be mother who refused to let her child's father be ensnared by a predator. That single word struck Marcia like a slap. For a moment she wavered, caught between indignation and the realization that she had lost. Something in Serena's unwavering stance, the fierce maternal energy radiating from her, made Marcia recoil. It was as though she sensed a greater power, one that she could not match. Wordless, she turned on her heel and stormed out of Ravenwood Manor, her carefully crafted schemes crumbling to dust behind her. Within days, Marcia felt the fallout of her defeat. Roland cancelled every design contract and sent cease and desist letters, barring her from contacting him or his businesses. Word spread among the city's elite. Her reputation, already fragile, was shattered. The aristocratic circles that once opened their doors to her turned hostile. Events, showrooms, and potential clients blacklisted her. The unscrupulous lenders she owed returned, demanding further payment. She had no protector now, no benefactor to bail her out. She was left vulnerable and destitute, haunted by the knowledge that she had lost the biggest mark of her life. Meanwhile, Serena and Roland began the slow process of mending their relationship. It was not simple. There were nights of arguments, tears, and soul-searching. However, the ordeal also forced them to confront weaknesses in their marriage that they had previously overlooked. In time, they found a deeper, more honest understanding of each other. Roland vowed to never again take Serena's love for granted or allow a stranger to drive a wedge between them. When Serena finally went into labor some weeks later, Roland was by her side, holding her hand, praying for the safe arrival of their child. In the hospital room, amid the beeping monitors and sterilized walls, they welcomed a baby girl into the world. As the tiny infant wailed her first cry, the burdens of betrayal and doubt seemed to lift. Serena cradled the child in her arms, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks, while Roland gently kissed his daughter's forehead. Marcia's name was never mentioned in that hospital room. She had become a fleeting spectre of misfortune, a hard lesson about the vulnerability even the wealthy could face. In the months and years that followed, the story of the mistress who tried to steal the millionaire circulated through Chicago's high society as a cautionary tale. And though some might have relished the drama, those who truly knew Serena Blackwood admired her for standing firm, for speaking a single word that shattered an illusion and preserved a family. Thank you for joining us on this tumultuous journey into a world of deception, heartbreak, and ultimate redemption. We've witnessed how ambition can twist minds, how trust can be tested, and how one woman's resolve to protect her family proved more powerful than any mistress's cunning. In the end, the truth prevailed, the false beauty of lies was exposed, and karma delivered its final blow. Most importantly, we learned that a marriage tested can become stronger, and that a new life, their baby girl, symbolizes hope for a better, more honest tomorrow.
What happens when the perfect fairy tale shatters in the most public way imaginable? We see the lives of the ultra-rich as a fantasy. Glittering galas, endless wealth, a love story for the ages. Julian Croft, the tech billionaire, and his radiant pregnant wife, Isabella, were the world's golden couple. But on a cold October night, under the crystal chandeliers of the Savoy Hotel in London, in front of hundreds of cameras, that fantasy became a nightmare. One moment a tender touch, the next the sickening crack of a slap that echoed around the globe. This isn't a story about a simple argument. This is a story about how a single, brutal act can expose a universe of secrets, lies, and a conspiracy so deep it could tear an empire apart. What could make a man who has everything risk it all with one swing of his hand? The answer is far more shocking than you could ever imagine. The air in the grand ballroom of the Savoy was thick with the scent of money and lilies. It was the annual Starlight Children's Foundation Gala, the glittering apex of London's philanthropic calendar. And at the heart of it all, holding court without a throne, were Julian and Isabella Croft. Julian Croft was a man sculpted from ambition and success. At 35, his company, Nexus Dynamics, had revolutionized renewable energy, making him not just a billionaire, but a visionary. He had sharp, intelligent eyes, a jawline that seemed carved from granite, and a smile that could disarm world leaders and secure billion-pound deals. Tonight, he was immaculate in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo. Beside him, a perfect counterpart was his wife, Isabella. She was beauty and grace, personified a former art curator, whose quiet intelligence was often overshadowed by her stunning looks. Tonight, she wore a flowing emerald gown of silk chiffon that elegantly draped over her 5-month pregnancy. The gentle swell of her belly was a public declaration of their shared future, the next chapter in their celebrated love story. Her dark hair was swept up, showcasing a cascade of diamond earrings, a recent gift from Julian. To the outside world, they were flawless. He the titan of industry, she his elegant, adored muse. The cameras adored them. The gossip columnists revered them. Their life was a curated masterpiece of polo matches, yachting in Monaco, and romantic getaways that filled the pages of lifestyle magazines. But a masterpiece can have cracks invisible to the naked eye. As the evening wore on, a subtle tension began to coil around their table. Julian's smile, usually so effortless, seemed bolted in place. His hand, when he placed it on Isabella's back, was less a caress and more an act of possession. His fingers were just a little too tight. "Are you all right, darling?" Isabella murmured, her voice a soft melody against the din of the orchestra. She placed her hand over his. It was cold. Julian's eyes didn't meet hers. They were scanning the room, flitting from face to face with a paranoid intensity. "I'm fine." He clipped his jaw tight, just enjoying the evening. But he wasn't. For the past 2 weeks, a poison had been seeping into his mind, drop by insidious drop. It had started with an anonymous email, then a misdelivered private investigator's report to his office, filled with grainy photos of Isabella having lunch with a male friend, an old university colleague. Benign, yet the accompanying text was venomous. Does she look like a woman carrying your child, or someone hiding a secret? The architect of this poison was a man named Damien Thorne, a ruthless business rival Julian had bested in a hostile takeover 2 years prior. Thorne had been publicly humiliated and financially wounded. He had vowed revenge, but Julian, arrogant in his success, had dismissed the threat. He never imagined the revenge would be so intimate, so personally destructive. Thorne had spent a year meticulously planting seeds of doubt, using proxies and anonymous channels to feed Julian's deepest insecurity, that he wasn't worthy of a love as pure as Isabella's seemed to be. Tonight, the poison was reaching its peak. Damien Thorne was here at a table across the ballroom, watching with a predator's patience. A few minutes earlier, he had approached Julian at the bar, a condolent look on his face. "Julian, my friend." Thorne had said, his voice slick with false sympathy. "I hope whatever is troubling you and Isabella passes. A beautiful family like yours, it would be a tragedy to see it broken by misunderstandings." He let the word hang in the air, a veiled threat wrapped in concern. Now back at his table, Julian watched as Isabella laughed at something a guest said. It was a beautiful sound, but in his corrupted mind, it sounded like a betrayal. The PI report had mentioned her easy laughter with her friend. Was she laughing at him? Was this whole perfect life a charade? The final speaker of the night, the Foundation's director, took to the stage. He began to speak about the importance of family, of protecting the innocent, of building a safe future for children. Each word was a hammer blow to Julian's fractured psyche. And now the director announced, "We'd like to honor a couple who have been our most generous benefactors, a true example of love and partnership. Please join me in a round of applause for Mr. Julian and Mrs. Isabella Croft." A spotlight flooded their table. The room erupted in applause. This was the moment. They were supposed to stand, wave, and embody the fairy tale. Isabella turned to Julian, her face alight with a genuine, proud smile. The love in her eyes was unmistakable, a beacon in the storm of his paranoia. "Julian, they're honoring us. Isn't it wonderful?" She reached for his hand. In that moment, her pure, unsuspecting joy was the final trigger. To his sickened mind, it was the ultimate act of deception. The gall of her to look so innocent, while in his mind, she was carrying another man's child and making a fool of him in front of the world that worshipped him. He stood up. Isabella started to rise with him, her smile still radiant. "Don't touch me," he snarled, his voice a low, terrifying growl that only she could hear. Her smile faltered. Confusion clouded her beautiful features. "Julian." "What's wrong?" she whispered, her hand still outstretched. He looked from her hand to her face, to the gentle curve of her stomach. The future he had so desperately wanted, now a symbol of his humiliation. The applause continued, a deafening soundtrack to his private hell. Damien Thorne was watching, a faint, triumphant smirk on his lips. It was all too much. The pressure, the paranoia, the public adoration that now felt like mockery. In one swift, horrific motion, Julian's carefully constructed world imploded. He drew his hand back and slapped her. The sound was sharp, ugly, and absolute. It cut through the applause like a guillotine. A collective gasp, a tidal wave of shock swept across the grand ballroom. The orchestra faltered, a violin screeching into silence. Every phone, every camera, every eye was locked on them. Isabella stumbled backward, her hand flying to her cheek, not in pain, peintan tun, but in sheer, unadulterated shock. The stinging on her skin was nothing compared to the shattering of her heart. Tears welled instantly, not of sadness, but of disbelief. The man she loved, the father of her child, had just struck her in front of the entire world. For a frozen second, there was only the tableau. The billionaire, his hand still half raised, his face a mask of rage and instant regret. The beautiful pregnant wife, her world destroyed. And the silent, watching crowd. Then the silence broke, and the crowd turned against him instantly. The silence that followed the slap lasted only 3 seconds, but within that void, an entire Emma began to crumble. It was a silence filled with the frantic clicking of camera shutters and the horrified, indrawn breaths of hundreds of people. Then came the roar. It wasn't a cheer. It was a wave of collective revulsion. The first voice to cut through was a woman's sharp cry from a nearby table, "You monster!" Suddenly, the spell was broken. The room, once a sea of polite smiles and quiet murmurs, erupted into a cacophony of outrage. Phones, which moments before were discreetly tucked away, were now held aloft, their small red recording lights, blinking like 100 angry eyes. The live stream of the gala, meant to capture philanthropy in action, was now broadcasting a billionaire's downfall in high definition. Julian stood frozen, the tingling in his palm, a horrifying echo of his action. The red haze of his rage evaporated as quickly as it had descended, replaced by a chilling, gut-wrenching clarity. What had he done? He looked at Isabella. Truly looked at her for the first time in weeks, past the veil of his suspicion. He saw not a deceiver, but the woman he had vowed to protect. Her eyes wide with a pain so deep it seemed to suck the air from his own lungs. Her hand was still on her cheek, her body trembling. Before he could utter a word, a figure moved with purpose from the table next to theirs. It was Beatrice Allister, a formidable woman in her late 60s, with silver hair styled in an elegant chignon and a reputation for philanthropy matched only by her sharp tongue. She was old money, a matriarch of London society, who feared no one, least of all a new money tech mogul having a breakdown. Ignoring Julian completely as if he were a piece of furniture, Mrs. Allister wrapped a steadying arm around Isabella's shoulders. "Come, my dear," she said, her voice firm but kind, a rock in the swirling chaos. "You will not stand here for one more second." Isabella, seemingly in a trance, allowed herself to be guided away. As she passed Julian, she didn't look at him. She looked straight ahead, her face a pale, tear-streaked mask of dignity. That lack of acknowledgement was more cutting than any scream or accusation could have ever been. He had ceased to exist for her. Julian reached out a desperate, reflexive gesture. "Isa, wait." His words were swallowed by the rising tide of condemnation. "Shame on you," another guest shouted. In front of everyone, a man yelled. The security detail, initially paralyzed by the profile of the individuals involved, now began to move, forming a clumsy barrier around Julian as reporters freed from the constraints of polite society surged forward. "Croft, why did you hit your wife? Is there trouble in the marriage? Is the baby okay?" The questions were like shrapnel. He staggered back, his mind unable to process the cacophony. His eyes darted across the room and locked with Damien Thorne's. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of performative, grave concern. Thorne even shook his head slightly as if to say, "What a tragedy." He was already playing his next move, distancing himself, becoming a concerned bystander to the demolition he had engineered. Julian's security team, led by a stoic man named Marcus, finally managed to hustle him towards a service exit. The walk was a gauntlet of pure hatred. People who had shaken his hand an hour ago now stared at him with contempt. They didn't step aside. They forced his security to carve a path through their disgust. As he was bundled into the dark corridor behind the kitchens, the last thing he heard from the ballroom was Mrs. Alistair's voice ringing with authority, directed at the gawking crowd. "Give the woman some dignity. All of you put your phones away this instant." In a quiet private suite on the hotel's 5th floor, secured by Mrs. Alistair's influence, Isabella sat on the edge of a silk-covered bed. A hotel doctor had just finished checking her vitals, reassuring her that physically both she and the baby were unharmed. The red mark on her cheek was already beginning to fade. The invisible wounds, however, were catastrophic. Mrs. Alistair dismissed the doctor with a grateful nod and sat beside her, handing her a glass of water. "Drink this, child." Isabella's hands were shaking too much to hold the glass. Mrs. Alistair held it to her lips for her. For a long time, Isabella said nothing. She just stared at the intricate pattern on the Persian rug, her mind a whiteout of shock. The public humiliation was a burning fire, but beneath it was the icy core of betrayal. The man who had recited poetry to her under the stars in Tuscany, the man who had cried with joy when she told him she was pregnant, the man whose child was moving inside her at this very moment, that man had looked at her with pure hatred and struck her. It wasn't him. She finally whispered the words, "horse." Mrs. Alistair raised a skeptical eyebrow. "My dear, I saw it with my own eyes. The whole world saw it." No, Isabella insisted, a flicker of her old strength returning. She looked up, her gaze clear and intense, despite the tears. "I mean, that man in the ballroom was not my husband, not the man I married. Something is wrong. Terribly, terribly wrong." She had seen glimpses of it for weeks. The paranoia, the sleepless nights, the sudden sharp questions about her past. He had become distant suspicious, a ghost haunting their perfect home. She had tried to talk to him, but he had pushed her away, retreating further into a fortress of dark thoughts. She had assumed it was the pressure of a new acquisition his company was making. She had never in her wildest nightmares imagined this. "He's been manipulated," Isabella said, the conviction growing in her voice. "Someone has been poisoning him against me." Her mind, sharp and analytical, from her years as a curator, piecing together the history of art, began to work. She thought of the strange stunts, the veiled comments. And then a name surfaced in her memory. Damien Thorne. She remembered Julian mentioning his strangely solicitous behavior recently. She remembered the look on Thorne's face at a board meeting she'd attended months ago, a look of cold, calculating hatred directed at Julian. Downstairs, Julian was finally bundled into the back of his Rolls-Royce Phantom. The car was immediately swarmed by paparazzi who had been alerted. The flashbulbs were relentless, a blinding, predatory storm. Inside the silent, leather-clad cocoon of the car, Julian slumped against the seathead in his hands. His phone was vibrating incessantly, a frantic text from his head of PR viral. Croft slap trending #1 worldwide. Stock futures in freefall. Call me now. He ignored it. All he could see was Isabella's face, the shock, the hurt, the utter destruction of her trust in him. The poison that Damien Thorne had poured into his ear now seemed like a pathetic, flimsy excuse for an act of unforgivable brutality. He hadn't been a manipulated man. He had been a weak one. He had allowed his own insecurities to be weaponized against the person he loved most. He had flown to the sun and in a moment of mad pride had melted his own wings. But he hadn't just fallen. He had dragged his pregnant wife and his unborn child down into the fire with him. The crowd had turned against him instantly, but the most damning judgment had been in Isabella's eyes, and he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that winning back the world's approval would be nothing compared to the impossible task of winning back hers. The 24 hours that followed the slap were not a news cycle. They were a global maelstrom. By dawn, Julian Croft was no longer a visionary billionaire. He was a meme, a villain, a hashtag. His face, contorted in rage, was juxtaposed against Isabella's look of stunned betrayal on every major news network, from CNN to the BBC. The headline in The Sun was simple and brutal. The Beast and the Beauty. Nexus Dynamics. The Empire. Julian had built from nothing was an empire of glass, and the world was now throwing stones. By the time the London Stock Exchange opened at 8 a.m., its stock had entered a free fall so catastrophic it triggered automatic trading halts. Investors weren't just nervous, they were morally repulsed. The company's board of directors, a collection of powerful figures who had once idolized Julian, convened an emergency meeting without him. The agenda had only one item, Clause 7 of his contract, the morality clause. Holed up in his sterile minimalist penthouse overlooking the Thames, Julian was a king in a kingdom of one. He hadn't slept. He had watched the news until the repetition of his own monstrous image made him physically sick. He had showered 3 times trying to scrub the phantom feeling of the slap from his skin. Marcus, his head of security, stood by the vast floor-to-ceiling windows, phone pressed to his ear, taking in a relentless stream of bad news. "Sir," Marcus said, his voice flat, devoid of its usual deference. "The board has voted. They're invoking the morality clause. They've requested your immediate and indefinite leave of absence. The press release is scheduled for noon." Julian didn't react. He was staring at a framed photo on his desk. It was of him and Isabella in Santorini, taken a year ago. She was laughing, her head thrown back, the setting sun catching the gold in her hair. He had been so sure then of his own goodness reflected in her eyes. "And Mrs. Croft?" Julian asked, his voice a rasp. "She remains at the Savoy, sir, in the royal suite. Mrs. Alistair has arranged for her own private security. My calls to her team have been rebuffed. They have made it clear that any attempt by you to approach or contact her will be met with a restraining order." Each word was a nail in his coffin. He was being surgically excised from his own life. His personal phone buzzed. It was his mother, a formidable woman calling from their family estate in the Cotswolds. He answered. "Julian," she began, her voice devoid of warmth. "I have just seen your father, a man who has never shown a moment of weakness in his 70 years. And he was weeping, not with anger, but with shame. Whatever you have become, it is not the son we raised." The line went dead. The weight of it all finally broke him. He swept his arm across his desk, sending the photo his laptop. Everything crashing to the floor. He sank into his chair, a strangled sob escaping his lips. This was the true consequence, not the money, not the company, but the severing of every bond of love and respect he had ever known. In the quiet luxury of the royal suite, Isabella was mounting a different kind of response. The initial shock had receded, replaced by a cold, clear-eyed resolve. She was not a victim to be pitied. She was a woman who had been wronged, and she needed to understand why. With the formidable Beatrice Alistair by her side, orchestrating a protective shield around her, Isabella began to piece together the puzzle. "Damien Thorne," Isabella said again, more certain this time. "He has to be behind this. Julian would never—" She trailed off. He had. But he had been pushed. Beatrice, using her vast network, made a few discreet calls. Within hours, a picture began to emerge, a whisper from a disgruntled former employee of Thorne's. A tip from a financial journalist who had been tracking Thorne's unusual short positions against Nexus Dynamics stock, placed a week before the gala. He wasn't just planning for a downfall, he was betting on it. The most crucial piece of information came from a junior IT technician at Nexus Dynamics, a young woman whom Isabella had once mentored when she visited the office. Terrified of losing her job, but fiercely loyal to Isabella, the technician called a private number Beatrice had provided. "Mrs. Croft," she whispered, "there's something you need to know. For the last month, Mr. Croft's private server has been compromised. A series of encrypted files were uploaded from an external source. They were designed to look like they came from a private investigator's office in another country. I saw the logs. They were untraceable, ghost-like. But the source IP, just for a millisecond before it was masked, pinged back to a holding company. A company owned by Thorne Industries." Isabella felt a chill run down her spine. "What was in the files?" The technician hesitated. "I only saw a file name before the system locked me out. It was Project Nightingale." Project Nightingale. It meant nothing to her. But it was a thread, and she pulled on it. Meanwhile, she knew the world was watching, waiting for her to speak. Her silence was being interpreted as weakness, the silent suffering of a battered wife. She needed to reclaim her own story. She turned to Beatrice. "I won't be a victim in his story, or in Damien Thorne's. I need to speak, not to a tabloid, but to someone serious. Someone who deals in facts, not sensationalism." Beatrice nodded, already scrolling through her contacts. "I know just the person. Clara Vance. Her interviews are legendary. She's tough, fair, and she can't be bought." Across London, in his opulent Mayfair office, Damien Thorne was celebrating. He poured 2 glasses of vintage Macallan whiskey and handed one to a man sitting in the shadows. "To Project Nightingale." Damien toasted, his eyes glittering with triumph. "More successful than I ever could have imagined. He didn't just crumble. He detonated." The man in the shadows, a disgraced geneticist named Dr. Aris Thorne. Damien's distant, debt-ridden cousin took a nervous sip. The files were convincing then. The fabricated DNA report, convincing. Damien laughed, a low, cruel sound. "Julian has one great weakness, Aris. Pride. All I had to do was suggest that his perfect wife, his perfect life was a lie, that the child he so desperately wanted wasn't his. I gave him a file showing a 99% probability that the fetus was related to Isabella's old university friend. Your work was very persuasive." Dr. Thorne shifted uncomfortably. "It was falsified data, Damien. A complete fabrication. If anyone ever investigates—" "Who will investigate?" Damien scoffed. "Julian is a pariah. Isabella is a broken woman. By the time the dust settles, I will have absorbed the remnants of Nexus dynamics, and he will have nothing. He took my company, so I took his life. An eye for an eye. He stared out the window at the gleaming towers of the city. He hadn't just won a business deal, he had authored a Greek tragedy. And he, the villain, was the only one left standing to enjoy the view. He was sure of it. He had accounted for Julian's pride and Isabella's love. He had not, however, accounted for her strength. Clara Vance was a journalist who moved with the quiet lethality of a panther. She didn't chase stories. Stories came to her drawn by her reputation for unearthing the truth with surgical precision. When she received the call from Beatrice Allister, she cancelled a scheduled interview with a cabinet minister. This was the real story. The interview was not set in a sterile television studio. At Isabella's request, it took place in the library of Mrs. Allister's Belgravia townhouse. The room was filled with old books and the quiet dignity of history, a deliberate choice to contrast with the garish modern chaos of the scandal. Isabella wore a simple cream cashmere dress. She was composed, her voice steady. There were no theatrics, no crocodile tears. There was only a woman determined to set the record straight. Clara began her questions gentle but probing. Isabella, the world saw an act of violence. What do you want the world to know now? Isabella looked directly into the camera. I want them to know that what they saw was not an act of domestic abuse in the way they understand it. It was the final tragic symptom of a sophisticated and cruel psychological attack against my husband, and by extension against me and our unborn child. The directness of the statement caught Clara off guard. Are you saying Julian Croft is the victim here? Julian is responsible for his actions, Isabella stated, her voice firm. He raised his hand to me, and that is something we will have to live with forever. It is a wound that may never heal. But he was not the sole architect of that moment. He was a puppet, and his strings were being pulled by a man named Damien Thorne. Over the next hour, Isabella, with Clara's expert guidance, laid out the facts. She spoke of Project Nightingale. She mentioned the compromised server, the tip from the loyal IT technician. She didn't have all the pieces, but she had enough to paint a damning picture of corporate espionage bleeding into personal warfare. But then came the moment that would change everything. There's one more thing, Isabella said, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. The foundation of this attack, I believe, was a lie about my baby. A lie designed to make my husband believe this child was not his. Clara leaned forward. And is it? Isabella looked into the camera again, her eyes unwavering. When Julian and I decided to have a child, we faced some difficulties. We used IVF to conceive. It was a private, deeply personal journey for us. She took a breath. As part of that process, our DNA, our genetic markers are all on file at the most reputable fertility clinic in the country, the Lister Hospital. They are irrefutable. She slid a sealed envelope across the table to Clara. That is a certified copy of the prenatal genetic report conducted 3 days ago. It confirms with 100% certainty that Julian Croft is the father of my child. The lie, whatever form it took, was a fabrication, and I am willing to have any independent doctor in the world verify it. This was the bombshell, not just a denial, but a scientifically proven refutation of the unspoken rumor that now hung over the scandal. The interview aired that evening. It didn't just change the narrative. It torched it. The public, so quick to condemn, was now faced with a far more complex and sinister story. The hashtag #CroftSlap was slowly being replaced by Project Nightingale, and #Damien Thorn. In his penthouse, Julian watched the interview transfixed. He saw Isabella not broken and weeping, but strong, intelligent, and fiercely protective of their child, of his child. He heard about the IVF, a secret they had kept so close, now laid bare to defend him. He heard about the compromised server, the fabricated lie about paternity. The paranoia that had encased him like a shroud was ripped away, and the truth was blinding. He wasn't a righteous man betrayed. He was a fool, a prized champion fool who had performed his trick for the whole world to see. He thought back to every conversation with Damien, every friendly warning, every piece of evidence. It was all so clear now. The pieces clicked into place with sickening precision. The name Project Nightingale echoed in his mind. It was a name from his past. Years ago, in his first major business venture, he had outmaneuvered Damien Thorn to acquire a small but brilliant biotech firm. The firm's signature research project, a revolutionary gene sequencing technique, was codenamed Nightingale. Thorn had never forgiven him for it. This wasn't just revenge. It was poetry. Thorn had used the ghost of their first battle to win the last one. A fire Julian hadn't felt in years ignited in his gut. It wasn't the blind rage from the gala. It was a cold, focused fury. He had been played, his wife had been endangered, and his child had been used as a weapon. He picked up his phone and called the one man he knew was still loyal, the one man who operated in the shadows better than anyone. Marcus. Marcus Julian said, his voice deadly calm. "Cancel my leave of absence. We're going to work. I want you to find a man, a geneticist named Dr. Eris Thorn. Find out everything about him, his debts, his vices, his fears. And I want you to arrange a meeting for me with Damien Thorn. Not in an office. Somewhere he can't escape." Damien Thorn watched the interview from his own home, the Macallan glass frozen halfway to his lips. This wasn't how the story was supposed to go. Isabella was supposed to disappear, a tragic footnote. She wasn't supposed to fight back with facts and evidence. His phone rang. It was his cousin Aris, his voice trembling with panic. "They know Damien. They're talking about a fabrication, the Lister Hospital. Their records are ironclad. We're ruined." "Calm down, you fool," Damien hissed, though his own heart was hammering against his ribs. "She has no proof connecting us to anything. It's her word against a ghost on the internet. Hold your nerve." But he knew it was too late. Isabella hadn't just cleared her name. She had given the world a new villain. And as the interview concluded with Clara Vance looking gravely at the camera and saying, "The question now is not what happened at the gala, but how far Damien Thorn was willing to go," he felt the first real tremor of fear. He had built a perfect trap for Julian Croft. He had just never considered that the bait might be the one to tear it all apart. Julian Croft had always understood that true power wasn't about shouting. It was about controlling the environment. For his confrontation with Damien Thorn, he chose the sky. The London Eye on a grey, drizzly weekday afternoon was nearly deserted. Marcus had booked an entire pod, citing a private corporate event. As the colossal wheel began its slow, silent ascent, the sprawling panorama of London unfolded below, a city that had witnessed both Julian's meteoric rise and his spectacular fall. Damien Thorn stepped into the pod just as the doors were closing, a look of wary curiosity on his face. He had come because the invitation was irresistible, a summons from a ghost. He expected to see a broken man. The man standing by the curved glass was not broken. Julian Croft was terrifyingly calm. The wild emotional rage of the gala was gone, replaced by an arctic stillness that was far more intimidating. Julian Damien began adopting his familiar tone of faux concern. I was horrified when I heard, "If there's anything I can do, save it, Damien." Julian cut him off, his voice low and even. He didn't turn to face him yet, continuing to gaze out at the city. "Let's talk about Project Nightingale." The name hit Damien like a physical blow. He stiffened his carefully composed mask, twitching. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Julian finally turned his eyes, locking onto Damien's. It was a good name. Poetic. A callback to the first time I beat you. The first time I took something you thought was yours. You've been nursing that grudge for a decade, haven't you? The pod reached its apex, 135 meters above the ground. Below, the world looked like a map. They were suspended between the heavens and the earth in a glass bubble of truth. "You found my weakness," Julian continued, taking a slow step forward. "It wasn't money or power. It was pride. The fear that I wasn't good enough, that the life I had was too perfect, that I didn't deserve Isabella. And you played on it like a virtuoso." Damien's facade began to crack. "You're delusional. Grief has clearly scrambled your mind." "My mind is clearer than it has ever been," Julian countered. "Let me tell you what I see. I see a man so consumed by envy that he decided to destroy a life rather than build his own. You couldn't beat me in the boardroom, so you crept into my home, into my marriage, into my head." He took another step. The pod was not large. There was nowhere for Damien to retreat. "You hired your cousin, Dr. Aris Thorne." Julian stated not as a question, but as a fact. A geneticist with a gambling problem and a mountain of debt. £100,000, was it? To falsify a DNA report, to make me believe my own child was a stranger growing inside the woman I love. Damien's face went pale. "You have no proof." "Proof." A small, cold smile touched Julian's lips. "Proof is for courts. This is for me. Marcus found your cousin an hour ago at the Luton airport trying to board a one-way flight to Macau. Dr. Thorne has a terrible fear of heights and enclosed spaces. He's a very talkative man when he's uncomfortable. He kept a copy of all your correspondence, by the way. An insurance policy. He signed a full confession half an hour ago." The last of Damien's composure shattered. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, terrified sheen. "You can't prove anything in court. It's inadmissible." "I don't need a court, Damien," Julian said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You wanted to see my empire fall. Well, you succeeded. My stock is in the gutter. The board has ousted me. My name is synonymous with disgrace. I have nothing left to lose." He gestured to the glass floor of the pod. "We're a long way up. Accidents happen. A scuffle between two distraught business rivals. A tragic fall. The media would love that story, wouldn't they? It has a certain symmetry." Terror, pure and primal, flashed in Damien's eyes. He finally saw the man in front of him, not as the disgraced fool from the gala, but as a predator who had been stripped of everything but his rage. He stumbled backward, pressing himself against the far side of the pod. "You're insane," he stammered. "You made me this way." Julian said, his voice laced with cold fury. You turned my love into a weapon against me. You threatened my child. My wife had to go on international television and discuss the intimate details of our life just to undo the damage you caused. You didn't just attack my business, you defiled my family. Julian stood inches from him now. The silence in the pod was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the machinery and Damien's ragged breathing. Julian raised his hand, the same hand that had struck Isabella. Damien flinched violently, cowering like a dog. But Julian didn't strike him. He simply let his hand hang in the air for a moment before slowly lowering it. Beating you would be a release. And you don't deserve one, Julian said, his voice filled with contempt. Your punishment won't be a moment of pain. It will be a lifetime of it. The confession, the evidence, it's already been sent to the Serious Fraud Office, the Financial Conduct Authority, and every major news outlet on the planet. Your assets will be frozen by morning. Your reputation will be incinerated. Every friend you have will desert you. You'll be the pariah. You'll be me, but without the slightest chance of redemption. The pod began its descent. The view of London rushed back into focus. Your revenge was a masterpiece of destruction, Damien. I'll give you that, Julian said, stepping back and turning to watch the city reappear. But you forgot one thing. When you burn a man's entire world down, you've got to make sure he's in it. All you did was clear the land for me to build something new. Now get out of my sight. As the pod doors opened with a gentle hiss, Marcus was waiting. Damien Thorne, a man who had walked in radiating arrogance, stumbled out a ghost in a 1,000-pound suit. He didn't look at Julian. He walked zombie-like into the arms of two plain-clothed police officers who were waiting for him just beyond the barriers. Julian watched him go, feeling not satisfaction, but a profound emptiness. He had won the war, but the battle that truly mattered was yet to come. He had to face Isabella. The chosen location was a world away from the cold marble of courtrooms and the sterile glass of corporate offices. Julian met her in the Princess of Wales Conservatory at Kew Gardens. Outside, a typically grey and melancholic London sky wept a fine drizzle onto the manicured lawns. But inside the glasshouse, it was another world. The air was warm, thick and alive with the humid scent of damp earth, exotic blossoms, and slow, patient growth. It was Isabella's choice, a neutral territory, a place of life to confront the death of their trust. Julian walked through the glass doors connecting the dry, arid zone to the tropical orchid display where she was waiting. The shift in atmosphere was immediate and suffocating. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the serene quiet of the conservatory. He had faced down hostile boards, ruthless competitors, and a global media firestorm. But that was all armor and artifice. This was different. This required a nakedness of the soul he wasn't sure he possessed. He saw her standing by a display of phalaenopsis orchids, their delicate, moth-like petals a stark white against the lush green foliage. She wasn't looking at him, but at the flowers, her profile silhouetted against the bright, diffused light of the glass panes. She wore a simple, elegant navy blue dress that did little to conceal the prominent, beautiful curve of her pregnancy. Her hair was pulled back simply, and she wore no jewelry. There was a stillness about her, a formidable serenity that was entirely new. The fragile, heartbroken woman from the Savoy was gone. In her place stood a queen in exile surveying the ruins of her kingdom with a sorrowful but unbreakable resolve. He stopped a dozen feet away, the distance feeling like an impassable chasm. Every rehearsed apology, Every carefully constructed sentence he had prepared evaporated into the humid air. All that was left was the horrifying, simple truth of his failure. "Issa," he began, his voice a dry, unfamiliar rasp. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet space. She turned slowly. Her eyes met his, and for a moment he saw a flicker of the woman he had danced with in Tuscany, the woman whose laughter was his favorite sound. But it was immediately guarded, replaced by a calm, appraising look. It was the look of someone studying a historical artifact, trying to understand how something so precious could have been so thoroughly broken. There was no hatred in her eyes, which was somehow worse. Hatred was a fire you could fight. This was a deep, glacial sadness. I know he started again, forcing the words out. I know that the word sorry is an insult to what I did. It's a word for spilling coffee, not for shattering a life. My life. Your life. Ours. He took a hesitant step forward, his hands clenched at his sides to stop them from shaking. "There is no excuse. I want you to hear that. There are reasons, a sickness in my own mind, a poison poured by another man. But there is no excuse. Damien Thorne didn't raise his hand to you. My pride did. My insecurity did. I did. I looked at you, the purest thing in my life, and I chose to believe a lie fabricated by the ugliest parts of the world. I chose to believe it over the evidence of every day I ever spent with you. That is my sin, and mine alone." He let the confession hang in the air, heavy and absolute. He didn't beg, didn't plead for understanding. He simply stated the truth of his guilt. Isabella listened, her expression unreadable. She walked slowly from the orchids to a simple wooden bench and sat down, her hand resting protectively on the swell of her belly. She looked at him for a long, silent moment before she spoke, her voice as quiet as the drizzle outside. "Do you know what the worst part was, Julian?" she asked, her voice steady, but laced with a profound tremor of memory. It wasn't the slap itself. The sting on my cheek was gone in an hour. The humiliation. That was a firestorm, but fires eventually burn out. The worst part, the part that plays in my mind when I try to sleep, was the 2 seconds before. It was the look in your eyes. Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not let them fall. I looked at my husband, the father of the child, moving inside me, and I saw a stranger. I saw a look of pure, undiluted hatred. You looked at me, at this baby, as if we were a contamination, a disease you needed to violently expel from your perfect life. In that moment, you didn't just hit at me. You erased me. You erased everything we had ever been. How do I ever unsee that? How does our child grow up knowing his father was capable of looking at his mother that way? Her questions weren't attacks. They were genuine points of inquiry from a soul in agony. And they pierced him more deeply than any shout could have. "You can't," he whispered, the admission tearing at his throat. "You can never unsee it. And I will spend every remaining day of my life trying to prove that the man you saw in that moment is dead. I killed him. Because if I don't, then I have no right to even breathe the same air as you and our child." He walked to the bench opposite her and placed a thick, leather-bound folder on it. The sound of it landing was definitive. "I came here today not to ask for forgiveness. I have no right to it. I came to begin my atonement." He pushed the folder across the table. "This is a legal transfer ratified this morning. Half of my entire personal fortune, everything that wasn't tied up in Nexus dynamics, has been placed into an irrevocable trust. The beneficiaries are you and our child. It is yours, untouchable by me, by the company, by anyone. It is security. It is freedom. It is a pathetic attempt to repair a fissure in the universe, but it's the only tool I have. He then slid a single sheet of paper from his jacket pocket. It was his formal, undated resignation as CEO of Nexus Dynamics. The board wants me back. To them, the scandal is manageable now that Thorn is exposed. But their opinion doesn't matter. Only yours does. If you want me to walk away to disappear from public life entirely, I will sign this right now, and it's done. If you want me to stay to rebuild the company and secure a legacy for our child, I will do that. The power is yours, Isabella. I am surrendering it to you completely. You will decide my future. Isabella looked from the folder to the resignation letter and finally back to his face. She saw no manipulation there, only the raw, desolate landscape of a man who had finally understood the totality of his failure. "Power is what broke you, Julian," she said softly. "The fear of losing it. The arrogance of having it. I don't want that power." She pushed the resignation letter back towards him. "A legacy for our child needs a father, not a ghost. Rebuild it, but rebuild it as a better man." She took a deep breath. "I'm using some of the funds to start a foundation. I'm calling it the Nightingale Foundation. It will provide legal and psychological support for victims of complex harassment and reputational attacks. I'm taking the ugliest thing that ever happened to me, and I am turning it into a shield for other people." He could only nod, overwhelmed by her strength and grace. "But you cannot come home," she said, her voice gaining a new firmness. It was the final condition, the one that mattered most. "Not now. Maybe not for a very long time. I need to feel safe. Our child needs to be born into a house of peace, not a house of ghosts. I need to heal. And you are broken, Julian. You need to fix yourself. Not for me. For you. You will seek intensive therapy. You will excavate every dark, insecure corner of your soul. And you will understand, truly, understand why you were fertile ground for such poison. You will become a man who is stronger than his own pride. Until you are that man, you will be a visitor in your child's life. A loving, supportive, but distant one. It wasn't a life sentence, but it was a long and lonely exile. It was also just. It was merciful. It was more than he deserved. "I will," he vowed, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Anything. Whatever it takes." A fragile silence settled between them again. This time, Isabella broke it. She stood up and slowly walked towards him. He braced himself, not knowing what to expect. She stopped in front of him, and with a courage that stunned him, she reached out, took his hand, the same hand that had struck her, and gently placed it flat against her stomach. The warmth of her skin, of the life beneath it, was a shock to his system. And then it happened. A tiny, decisive, living pulse fluttered against his palm. A kick. His breath caught in his throat. A single tear finally escaped and traced a path down his cheek. He looked from his hand on her belly to her face. A faint, watery smile touched her lips, a mirror of his own. It was not a smile of joy or forgiveness, but one of shared, profound, and heart-breaking humanity. It was the first light after a long and terrible storm. The path to redemption was a vast, uncharted wilderness. But in that moment, with his hand on his wife and his child kicking within, he knew he had finally found the first step. The story of Julian and Isabella isn't just a drama about the rich. It's a powerful lesson about trust betrayal and the devastating impact of lies. It shows how even the strongest love can be poisoned from the outside. But it also reveals the incredible strength it takes to fight back, not with vengeance, but with truth. Their journey is far from over. Can a man who committed such a public sin ever truly atone for it? Can a woman's trust, once so completely shattered, ever be rebuilt? Their future, and the future of their child, hangs in the balance. What do you think? Should Isabella eventually forgive Julian completely? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.